in this lesson, we will be looking at shadows. So let's have a quick look here. So basically what we want to do is we want to create shadows. We will break this down into different sections. In this lesson, we will only focus on a single plane and how it casts shadows on a floor or ground object like we've got here. Let me quickly jump into 3D and explain what the relation of the sun is towards objects and how we look at things in 3D. And then we'll get back into 2D and I'll explain how we are going to draw the shadows. 3D, let's have a quick look in 3D. This is the top view and this is the front view, and here's our isometric perspective. So there's a few things that we need to keep in mind when we're dealing with lighting. Got a sun, and remember with sun the rays are parallel. Let's rotate the sun in front view and look at what the shadow does in the isometric perspective. If the sun is 90 degrees from the top, it won't cast a shadow like we've got it here. But if we turn the sun, like for instance the sun is going down, the shadows will get longer. So that's the one thing we need to keep in mind. The altitude of the sun and how it's going down behind the horizon. For instance, let's undo the rotation and rotate it by 45 degrees. That's 45 degrees. So let's imagine that this is the Earth. The sun has come up and it's about 10 o'clock in the morning, 10 o'clock-ish. So it's not noon yet and it's not morning anymore. The sun sits about 45 degrees, casting 45 degrees angles. So if you look at that, you'll see that it casts a 45-degree angle shadow. The other thing we need to keep in mind is that the sun, depending on where we stand according to the sun's angle will change, or the shadow's angle will change from our perspective. So in this case, the sun is coming 90 degrees from the side, but in our perspective view, the shadow is going about 45 degrees upwards. So if I rotate the sun, you'll see that the shadow pivots around the base of that pillar that we've got in the scene. We always want to know where the ground is and where our object is touching or will be touching the ground. It becomes important because when we move objects up in the air, the shadow will move away from it, but the line towards the ground will never change, and the line towards that point where it touches the ground, or where it's supposed to touch the ground, will never change. So we always need to know where our object is touching the ground, or will be touching the ground, say for instance if we took it up into the air. So this is vital to our understanding of where our shadow needs to be. So let me do this. I'm going to duplicate the pillar, scale it down on the z-axis till it's about there, and then let's pull this up now. And that's where we need to know where the pillar is touching the ground. But it's important for any other kind of object that we draw in isometric, because it's always going to relate back to that point where it touches the ground. So now that we've seen how things work in 3D, let's have a quick look at how we can create a shadow in 2D. I'm going to create a new layer, and I'm going to use my brush tool. I'm going to reset it to black and white, and let's zoom in a little bit. And I'm going to use that as a basis and pull it up and pull it down. So that's fairly basic and easy to do. And I just want to fill that with a solid fill layer, solid fill color. So I just want to, what if I expand that a little bit? And I'm going to use solid full color. I'm going to make it a bluish gray color like that, but I'm going to reduce the opacity for this. Let's group that together and call that vertical plane. So that's our plane, and currently there's no shadow for it. So it's basically just without any lighting. Let's create a new layer underneath that and call this shadow angle. All right, and then let's make this a yellow color for to represent the sun. Then from that very corner, we're going to draw a line. Let's make sure it touches that corner there. Let's zoom out. Now let's imagine that this is the sun, and it is casting, or the sunlight is coming in from this angle. So it's coming directly in from the side. From our perspective, from where we stand, thus the shadow will go in that direction. But say for instance we want to make the shadow go that way, then we can change the angle of the sun, and that should also change the angle of our shadow. Right, so that's fairly easy to understand, and we always relate it to, let's say for instance, always pick one point, a vertical line, like the pillar in 3D. We pick that line, and that's our basis for where we want to create our shadow angle from. So our shadow angle is from that point. So let's do this the easy way for now and duplicate that. So we're going to use the grid lines to create our shadow. Now let's imagine, let's call that sun layer, and let's create a new layer. Let's call this sun height angle. And let's make this an orangey color. So if the sun is high, that angle could go to there. If the sun is getting lower, the angle would change. So the lower the sun goes to the horizon, the lower this angle, or the longer the shadow starts to get. So let's use that line. So let's delete all of that and create a brush, use the brush, and make the shadow to that point. So remember that the sun's rays are always parallel, so it never does that. In our scenario, these lines should always be parallel. So then we bring that over, so from that point to that line. And now we've got all that we need for our shadow. So let's put these together. So there's our guidelines. And then using the lasso tool, I'm going to make a selection of this. Then create a new solid fill layer. I'm going to give it a bluish color, like so, and multiply it. I'm going to bring the opacity down a little bit. Okay, let's call this guides. Okay, so there we go. So that's the first step. Let's duplicate that plane and move it over a little bit. So if it's on the ground, it's on the same level as that one. But say for instance we want to move this up by one block. So we've moved it up by one block now. It's actually now higher than that one. Let's move it over a little bit. Okay, it's still on the same plane, move it up one block. So it's higher now, and its shadow will not cast from that point, but from the point on the ground. So let's do that. Create a new layer. And let's make this a blue color. And then pull it down from that point. Pull it down from that point. And this is where it touches the ground. Now remember, we've got the guides in here. And we've got the sun angle on the ground. So let's duplicate that and reuse that because it's the same scene. So we want to keep things similar in the scene. Let's pull this to that point now and duplicate it again. And for the same reason, we want to use the same angle as we've got here. So let's duplicate that as well and bring it over. Okay, but we need it a little bit longer, so I'm just going to duplicate that, bring it down, and then merge it with the layer below it. So now we've got that where the shadow will be. Now we want to duplicate this again, bring it over, and we need to do the same for the bottom corners. Okay. Like so. So the shadow will touch here. So the shadow on this plane's shadow will start from here, go to there, there, and there. So that's the 4 points that we need to use to make our shadow. So I'm going to use the lasso tool again and create a new. Let's do this. Let's use that copy and then create a new solid fill layer and paste the color in there, multiply, and we had it at 95%. Let's make it 95%. Let's put this also into a group. So this is our guides. So now you can see that this plane is on the ground and this plane is up in the air. So it moved up a little bit more into the air. So you can clearly see this one is on the ground and this one is not. So it's floating in the air. And now we want to do the same thing again, but this time we want to change the angle of the sun. So remember that we said that we need to use this corner, this edge here, as our pillar. And let's change the angle of the sun to something new. So let's imagine that the sun is coming in from that side. So it's casting the shadow in that direction. Let's create a new layer and we want the angle to be slightly different to the previous one. So we want the angle to be much longer. So our sun is quite low on the horizon and it's casting quite a long shadow now. We can group these two layers together, these two lines together, and then duplicate them and then just move them over to where they touch the corners on the other side. And now you'll see that your shadow is going to be cast in this area here. So let's quickly select the lasso tool and create a new selection and make a new solid fill layer, 95%, and let's put the guides off. Okay, so let's set that to multiply. So now you can see that this differs from the previous one. So you can see that the sun is quite low in this scenario, and that the sun is coming in from a different angle compared to what we had before. So in this scenario, the sun is coming in from this side, and the sun is not that high in the sky. And in this scenario, the sun is coming in from that side, and it's quite a long shadow. So let's repeat that again. Let's duplicate that. Okay, so we've duplicated that same plane again. This time we want to have the sun coming in from a different direction, from a different side, and we want to have the square quite high in the sky. We've got the guides that go down to the ground. Let's create the sun angle. So let's imagine that the sun is coming in from that side, but not following our grid line, but maybe let's make it closer towards us. So that's the angle of the sun. Let's duplicate that, bring it in like that. So that's the angle of the sun. And then the altitude of the sun, let's make that an orangey color. It's going to be quite high, so the sun is it's almost noon. And then we can duplicate that again towards that side. And we need to duplicate it again so that we have angles from each of the corners of the plane. Now you can see that we've got our shadow shape in there. Let's use the lasso tool again and complete the shadow. Right. And if we now put it off, you can see that the sun is quite high from this angle, casting a shadow in here. So now you can see that we've got different scenarios of sunlight coming in from different directions and casting different shadows. Now remember, you can't have all of this in one scene. All of the planes that are in this scene will have shadows that's directed by this sunlight, and it's the same for this one, and it's the same for this one. You can't have three suns with three different directions. Okay, so let's put this into action. This is our guides for this plane. So I'm just going to put it over there. I'm going to draw new guides for this one, and let's imagine that it's one block off the ground. So Shift Control New, enter, and I'm going to use blue for the vertical lines. Try to keep a kind of system where you use the same color for your guidelines, which will make it easier to follow and understand what you need to do. So let's call that guides 01, guides 02, and let's use this yellow color. Orangey color. Let's follow the same. So I'm just going to do that, bring it over, duplicate it, and duplicate it. And then we want to do the same for the sunlight direction. And this time we want to use a yellowish color like that. Brush, and let's use the same direction. So bring this over to here and duplicate it. Right, and that's quite easy now to, let's put those guides off. Now we can use the same principles to draw our shadow that's being cast on the floor. That concludes today's lesson. In the next lesson, we will look at creating shadows for circles on a plane. See you in the next one.